Have you ever trusted someone so completely that you gave them the power to destroy your entire life? Have you ever loved someone so deeply that you ignored every red flag, every warning sign, every moment when your gut told you something was wrong? This is my story. My name is Emma, and I'm about to tell you how the man I thought was my soulmate became my worst nightmare, and how one shocking truth gave me the power to shut him down completely. It started 3 years ago in the most romantic way you can imagine. I was working as a freelance graphic designer, finally building my own business after years of struggling in corporate jobs that drained my soul. Life was good, but it was lonely. I was so focused on my career that I'd forgotten what it felt like to have someone special in my life. Then I met David. He walked into the coffee shop where I was working on a client presentation, and it was like something out of a movie. Tall, confident, with this incredible smile that made my heart skip a beat. But what really caught my attention wasn't his looks. It was the way he helped an elderly woman who had dropped her purse. He didn't just pick it up. He made sure she was okay, walked her to her car, and came back with this genuine warmth in his eyes. "That was really sweet," I said, when he sat down at the table next to mine. "Just trying to make the world a little better," he replied with that smile. "I'm David, by the way." That conversation lasted 4 hours. We talked about everything: our dreams, our fears, our past relationships, our hopes for the future. David told me he was an investment advisor, that he'd built his own firm from nothing, that he believed in helping people secure their financial futures. He was passionate, intelligent, and incredibly charming. But more than that, he seemed genuinely interested in me. He asked about my business, my goals, my challenges. When I told him about some of the financial struggles I'd faced as a freelancer, he offered advice without being condescending. When I mentioned my dream of expanding into brand consulting, his eyes lit up with excitement for my future. "You're amazing," he said, as we finally prepared to leave. "I'd love to take you to dinner sometime and hear more about your business plans." Our first date was magical. David took me to this little Italian restaurant where the owner knew him by name. He was thoughtful, funny, and incredibly supportive of my career goals. When I mentioned that I was nervous about a big presentation the next week, he spent an hour helping me practice, offering suggestions and boosting my confidence. "You're going to crush it," he said, and I believed him because he believed in me. That presentation landed me my biggest client ever, and David was the first person I called to share the good news. He insisted on taking me out to celebrate, and that night he told me something that made my heart soar. "I've never met anyone like you, Emma," he said, taking my hand across the dinner table. "You're brilliant, talented, and so incredibly driven. I want to be part of your success story." 6 months later, we moved in together. David's apartment was beautiful, a penthouse downtown with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view that took my breath away. "What's mine is yours," he said as he handed me a key. "We're a team now." And we were a team. David helped me rebrand my business, introduced me to potential clients, and even invested in new equipment for my home office. He was supportive when I had difficult clients, encouraging when projects didn't go as planned, and celebratory when I achieved new milestones. But the best part was how he made me feel. For the first time in my life, I felt like I had a true partner, someone who understood my ambitions, supported my dreams, and wanted to build a future together. We talked about marriage, about buying a house, about the life we would create together. "I love how independent you are," David would tell me. "I love that you have your own dreams and goals. That's what makes us so perfect together." I thought I had found my happily ever after. I thought I had found a man who loved me for exactly who I was. I thought I could trust him with my heart, my dreams, and my future. I was so incredibly wrong. The first sign that something was off came about a year into our relationship. I was working on a major rebranding project for a tech startup, the kind of project that could really establish my reputation in the industry. It was challenging, creative, and exactly the kind of work I'd always dreamed of doing. But David started acting strange about it. He would ask detailed questions about the client, about the project timeline, about the budget. At first, I thought he was just being supportive and interested in my work. But then his questions became more specific, more probing. "Are you sure you're charging them enough?" he would ask. "You don't want to undervalue yourself." When I told him the project fee, his reaction surprised me. Instead of being proud of how much I was earning, he seemed almost disappointed. "That's it?" he said. "For all that work? Emma, you're worth so much more than that." I brushed off my concerns. David was just looking out for me, making sure I wasn't being taken advantage of. That's what partners do, right? But then other things started happening, things that, looking back, should have been massive red flags. The first major warning sign came when David started offering to help with my business in ways that felt more like taking over than supporting. "You know what?" he said one evening as I was working on invoices. "Why don't I handle your books? I'm good with numbers, and it would free up more time for you to focus on the creative work you love." It seemed thoughtful at first. David was excellent with finances. After all, that was his profession, and managing invoices and expenses wasn't exactly my favorite part of running a business. So I said yes, thinking I was lucky to have a partner who wanted to help. But within a few weeks, things started feeling different. David began making decisions about my business without consulting me. He changed my payment terms with clients, telling me it was more professional to require payment up front. He started handling all my client communications about money, saying he could negotiate better rates than I could. "Trust me," he would say whenever I expressed concerns. "This is what I do for a living. I know how to maximize your income." And he was right about one thing. My income did increase. David seemed to have a magic touch when it came to getting clients to pay higher rates. But something felt off. Clients who had always been friendly and communicative suddenly became distant. Some stopped responding to my emails altogether. When I asked David about it, he had explanations for everything. "They're just intimidated by your success," he would say. "Some people can't handle working with someone who knows their worth." But the explanations didn't ease the growing anxiety in my stomach. Then came the incident with my biggest client, the tech startup I'd been working with. They were so happy with my initial work that they wanted to hire me for an ongoing brand consulting role. It was exactly the kind of opportunity I'd been working toward for years. But when I went to David excitedly with the news, his reaction was strange. "Are you sure you want to take on that much responsibility?" he asked. "It sounds like it might be overwhelming. Maybe you should focus on smaller, simpler projects for now." I was confused. This was the same man who had been encouraging me to dream big, to reach for the stars, to build the business I'd always wanted. Why was he suddenly telling me to play it safe? "But this is what I've been working toward," I said. "This could change everything for my business." David's smile looked forced. "I just worry about you taking on too much stress. I want you to be happy, not burned out." Despite his concerns, I decided to accept the consulting role. It was too good an opportunity to pass up. But David's lack of enthusiasm cast a shadow over what should have been one of the happiest moments of my career. Things got worse from there. David started questioning every business decision I made. He would suggest that clients were trying to take advantage of me, that I was working too hard for too little money, that I should be more selective about who I worked with. "You're too trusting," he would say. "You need to be more careful about who you do business with." The most confusing part was that David's concerns never seemed to apply to the clients he brought me. Whenever he introduced me to someone who needed design work, suddenly all his warnings about being careful and selective disappeared. "This guy's different," he would say. "He really appreciates quality work and isn't afraid to pay for it." But these clients David brought me were strange. They always wanted to pay in cash, always had urgent deadlines, and always seemed more interested in David than in me. I would catch them having long conversations in hushed tones, and whenever I approached, they would quickly change the subject. When I asked David about it, he would laugh it off. "They're just networking," he would say. "That's how business works. You scratch my back, I scratch yours." But my instincts were screaming that something was wrong. The problem was, I loved David so much that I kept pushing those instincts aside. I kept telling myself that I was being paranoid, that I was lucky to have a partner who cared so much about my success. I had no idea that David wasn't trying to protect my business. He was trying to control it, and I was about to find out exactly why. The truth came crashing down on a Tuesday morning in the worst possible way. I was in David's home office looking for a phone charger when I accidentally knocked over a stack of papers on his desk. As I bent down to pick them up, I saw something that made my blood run cold. It was a contract with my name on it, but it wasn't a contract I'd ever seen before. My hands were shaking as I read the document. It was an agreement between David and one of my clients. Except according to this contract, David was the one providing design services. My work, my creativity, my sleepless nights, perfecting every detail, all of it was being sold under David's name. And the price was 3 times what I thought the client was paying. I felt sick to my stomach, but I forced myself to keep looking through the papers. What I found was worse than I could have ever imagined. There were dozens of contracts, all with David's name as the service provider, all featuring work that I'd created, all for amounts that were significantly higher than what David had told me the clients were paying. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was finding contracts for clients I had never even heard of. Clients who were apparently paying David thousands of dollars for design work that looked suspiciously like projects I had worked on months earlier. David had been stealing my work and selling it to other clients without my knowledge. My heart was pounding as I continued searching through his files. I found bank statements showing deposits that were 10 times larger than what David claimed to be earning from his investment business. I found emails between David and his clients discussing Emma's latest designs and how to keep her from finding out about the markup. Then I found the email that broke my heart completely. It was a conversation between David and someone named Marcus discussing a new project. But they weren't talking about investments or design work. They were talking about me. "She's getting suspicious," David had written, "asking too many questions about the clients you've been sending. We might need to find a way to keep her more distracted." Marcus's response was even more chilling. "Just keep her happy and productive. The quality of her work is what's making us so much money. Can you get her to work on the Henderson project next? They're willing to pay big for something in her style." I realized with growing horror that David's entire relationship with me had been a lie. He hadn't fallen in love with me. He had targeted me. He had seen a talented, hard-working freelancer who was struggling to find her footing, and he had seen an opportunity to profit from my skills without giving me any of the credit or compensation I deserved. Every supportive word, every encouraging smile, every "I believe in you" had been manipulation designed to keep me working hard while he stole the fruits of my labor. But the most devastating discovery was yet to come. In a folder marked Emma Future Plans, I found David's real strategy. He had been systematically alienating my original clients, the ones who knew me personally and might have questioned why their communications were suddenly going through him instead of directly to me. He had been replacing them with his own network of contacts, people who knew they were buying my work but had no relationship with me personally. The plan was to gradually transition all of my business relationships to go through him until I became completely dependent on the clients he provided. Eventually, I would be nothing more than his employee, creating work under his direction while he controlled every aspect of my business and kept the majority of the profits. And the worst part? It had been working. I had been so grateful for his help, so impressed by his business acumen, so in love with his support and encouragement, that I had handed him control of my entire livelihood without even realizing it. I sat in that office for an hour, reading through document after document, each one revealing another layer of David's betrayal. He had been stealing from me, lying to me and manipulating me for over 2 years, and he had been so good at it that I had thanked him for his help every single day. When I heard David's car in the driveway, I quickly put everything back exactly as I had found it. But inside, I was burning with rage, heartbreak, and a determination to make him pay for what he had done to me. David walked into the house with that same charming smile, gave me a kiss on the cheek, and asked about my day as if he wasn't in the process of systematically destroying my life and stealing my dreams. "How's the Johnson project coming along?" he asked, referring to a client he had brought me the week before. Great, I managed to say, even though I now knew that Johnson was probably paying David $10,000 for work he was paying me $2,000 to complete. That night, as David slept peacefully beside me, I lay awake planning my revenge. He thought he was so smart, so careful, so completely in control of the situation. He had no idea that I had discovered his secret, and he definitely had no idea what I was capable of when someone I loved betrayed me this completely. David had made one crucial mistake in his master plan. He had underestimated the woman whose talent and hard work had made him rich. He was about to learn exactly how dangerous that mistake could be. I spent the next 3 days acting completely normal while secretly planning David's downfall. Every smile I gave him, every "thank you for helping with my business" I uttered, every kiss goodnight was part of my performance while I gathered evidence and prepared for war. But I had to be smart about this. David had been manipulating me for 2 years. He was clearly intelligent, calculating, and good at covering his tracks. If I confronted him directly, he would probably have explanations for everything, or he would find a way to turn the situation around and make me feel like I was the one being unreasonable. No, I needed something more devastating than a confrontation. I needed to expose him in a way that would destroy his reputation and ensure that he could never do this to anyone else. First, I started documenting everything. I took pictures of every contract, every bank statement, every email I could find. I made copies of files from his computer when he was at work. I even started recording our conversations about my business to capture his lies in his own voice. What I discovered during those 3 days of investigation was even worse than I had initially thought. David wasn't just stealing from me. This was his entire business model. I found evidence of at least 6 other freelancers whose work he was selling under his name. Graphic designers, writers, web developers, photographers, all talented people who thought they had found a supportive partner or helpful business advisor, when really they had found a predator. Some of the contracts went back 5 years. David had been running this scheme long before he met me, and I was just his latest victim. The realization made me sick, but it also made me more determined than ever to stop him. But I still needed the perfect moment to strike. David was scheduled to speak at a major business conference the following week, an event where he would be presenting himself as a successful entrepreneur and investment advisor to hundreds of potential clients and industry professionals. That's when I had my idea. David loved being the center of attention. He loved being seen as successful, intelligent, and trustworthy. His reputation was everything to him. It was how he attracted new victims, how he maintained his scheme, and how he justified his lifestyle to himself and others. I was going to destroy that reputation in the most public way possible. I contacted the conference organizers and told them I was David's business partner and that I had some materials that would enhance his presentation. They were happy to help set up the additional equipment I requested. Then I reached out to every freelancer I could identify as one of David's victims. It took some detective work, but I managed to track down most of them through their online portfolios and social media profiles. Some of them had suspected they were being taken advantage of, but none of them had realized the full scope of David's deception. "Would you like to help me expose him?" I asked each of them. "Would you like to make sure he can never do this to anyone else?" Every single one of them said yes. We spent the next week preparing our evidence, coordinating our stories, and planning our approach. We had contracts, emails, financial records, and testimony from multiple victims. We had everything we needed to prove that David Chen was nothing more than a sophisticated thief who had built his entire business on stolen work and broken trust. The night before the conference, David was nervous about his presentation. He kept rehearsing his speech about building successful business partnerships and identifying opportunities in the creative economy. The irony would have been funny if it weren't so infuriating. "You're going to be great," I told him, giving him an encouraging smile. "Everyone's going to see exactly who you really are." David smiled back, completely missing the double meaning in my words. He thought I was being supportive. He had no idea that I was promising him complete destruction. As we got ready for bed, David pulled me close and said something that almost made me break character. "You know I love you, right?" he said. "You mean everything to me. I just want you to be successful and happy." Looking into his eyes, I almost believed him for a moment, almost forgot about the contracts, the stolen work, the lies, the manipulation, almost convinced myself that maybe there was an explanation, maybe I had misunderstood something. Then I remembered the email where he had called me a distraction that needed to be managed. I remembered the contracts where my work was being sold for 10 times what I was being paid. I remembered the other victims whose trust he had violated just like mine. "I love you too," I lied and kissed him goodnight. Tomorrow, David would learn what it felt like to have someone you trust completely destroy your entire world. Tomorrow, he would understand exactly what he had done to me and so many others. Tomorrow, the truth would finally come out. The conference hall was packed with over 300 business professionals, potential investors, and industry leaders. David was in his element, working the room before his presentation, shaking hands and charming everyone he met. He looked confident, successful, and completely unsuspecting. I sat in the back row with 3 of the other victims we had contacted. They had traveled from different cities to be here for this moment. We all had one thing in common. We wanted to see David face the consequences of his actions. "Ladies and gentlemen," the moderator announced, "please welcome David Chen, founder of Chen Consulting Group, speaking on building profitable creative partnerships." The audience applauded as David took the stage. He looked handsome and professional in his expensive suit, every inch the successful entrepreneur he pretended to be. "Thank you," David began with that charming smile. "I'm here today to talk about something I'm passionate about, finding and nurturing creative talent. Over the past 5 years, I've had the privilege of working with some incredibly gifted designers, writers, and artists, helping them turn their creativity into profitable businesses." I felt sick listening to him describe his theft and manipulation as nurturing talent, but I forced myself to wait. The presentation system was already set up with my additional materials, ready to go at exactly the right moment. David continued his speech, talking about the importance of strategic partnerships and mutual benefit in creative businesses. He shared carefully edited success stories that made him sound like a mentor and supporter rather than the predator he really was. "One of my most successful partnerships," he said, "is with a graphic designer who has become one of the most sought-after brand consultants in the city. When I first met Emma, she was struggling to find clients and price her services appropriately. Through our partnership, she's now earning more than she ever dreamed possible." That was my cue. I stood up from my seat and walked toward the front of the room. David's eyes widened when he saw me, clearly confused about why I was there. "That's interesting, David," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the microphone system we had set up. "Would you like to tell everyone exactly what this partnership entails?" The audience murmured, sensing that something unexpected was happening. David tried to maintain his composure, but I could see the panic starting to creep into his eyes. "Emma, what are you doing here?" he asked, his charming facade beginning to crack. "I'm here to share some additional materials for your presentation," I said, pulling out a remote control. "Materials that will help everyone understand what your business model really looks like." I clicked the remote, and the large screen behind David filled with one of the contracts I had found in his office. The contract that showed him selling my work for $15,000 while paying me $3,000. The audience gasped. David's face went completely white. "This is one of dozens of contracts I found," I continued, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. "Contracts where David sells work created by freelancers for 3 to 5 times what he pays them, using his name as the service provider." I clicked again, and the screen showed emails between David and his contacts, discussing how to keep the talent productive and manage their expectations about pricing. "David doesn't nurture creative talent," I announced to the room. "He exploits it. He builds relationships with talented freelancers, gains their trust, takes control of their businesses, and then steals credit for their work while keeping the majority of the profits." David tried to interrupt, to explain, to regain control of the situation, but I wasn't finished. "I'm not the only victim," I said, gesturing to the other freelancers who were now standing up throughout the audience. Sarah Martinez, web developer; Tom Chen, photographer; Lisa Williams, copywriter; Jake Peterson, graphic designer. We're all here because David stole our work, lied about client payments, and built his business on our talent while giving us nothing but manipulation and false promises. One by one, my fellow victims took the microphone and shared their stories. The audience listened in growing horror as the full scope of David's scheme became clear. Sarah showed contracts proving David had sold her website designs for $50,000, while telling her the client could only afford $8,000. Tom had evidence that his photography was being licensed to major corporations for thousands of dollars, while David claimed the usage rights were just for small local businesses. With each revelation, David seemed to shrink smaller and smaller on the stage. His reputation, his credibility, his entire carefully constructed persona was crumbling in real time in front of hundreds of industry professionals. But I saved the worst revelation for last. David's most recent plan, I announced, was to gradually take over complete control of my business until I became nothing more than his employee, creating work under his direction while he controlled all client relationships and kept 80% of the profits. Here's his written strategy, found in a folder labeled Emma Future Plans. The final documents appeared on screen, showing David's cold, calculated plan to eliminate my independence entirely and turn me into his creative slave. The room was completely silent, except for the sound of David's heavy breathing. He looked like a man watching his entire world collapse, which is exactly what was happening. David Chen isn't a business mentor or creative partner, I concluded. He's a predator who targets talented, hardworking people and destroys their trust for profit. And now everyone knows exactly who he really is. The aftermath of David's public exposure was swift and devastating for him. Within hours, videos of the conference presentation were circulating on social media. David Chen Exposed became a trending hashtag as people shared the footage and expressed their outrage at his predatory business practices. David tried to leave the conference immediately after my presentation, but he was surrounded by reporters, former clients demanding explanations, and potential victims who were just beginning to realize they might have been targets of his schemes. By the end of the week, David's business was finished. Clients were canceling contracts, demanding refunds, and threatening legal action. The State Business Licensing Board opened an investigation based on the evidence we had provided, and every freelancer in the city knew to avoid David Chen like the plague. But the most satisfying part wasn't David's professional destruction. It was watching him finally face the emotional consequences of his actions. 3 days after the conference, David came home to find me packing my things. He looked broken, desperate, and completely different from the confident man who had manipulated me for 2 years. "Emma, please," he begged. "You have to understand, I never wanted to hurt you. I love you. Everything I did was to help build our future together." I stopped packing and looked at him with the coldest stare I could manage. "You love me?" I asked. "David, you never loved me. You loved what I could produce for you. You loved having a talented, trusting woman you could exploit. You loved the money my work generated. But you never loved me." His eyes filled with tears, but I felt nothing but contempt. "If you had loved me," I continued, "you would have been proud of my success, not threatened by it. You would have encouraged my independence, not tried to destroy it. You would have been honest with me, not spent 2 years lying to my face while stealing my life's work." David tried to argue, to explain, to somehow justify what he had done. But there was no justification for systematic betrayal, and we both knew it. "I trusted you with everything," I said, picking up my last suitcase, "my heart, my dreams, my future, and you turned that trust into a weapon against me. That's not love, David. That's abuse." As I walked toward the door, David made one last desperate plea. "What am I supposed to do now?" he asked. My business is destroyed. My reputation is ruined. I have nothing left. I turned back to look at him one final time. Now you know how it feels, I said. Now you know what it's like to have someone you trust destroy everything you've built. The only difference is you deserved it. 6 months later, my business was thriving like never before. The publicity from exposing David had actually brought me more clients than I'd ever had before. People wanted to work with the woman who had the courage to stand up to a predator and protect other victims. David, meanwhile, had disappeared from the business community entirely. Last I heard, he was working at a call center in another state, trying to rebuild his life under a cloud of scandal and legal troubles. The other victims and I had formed a support network, helping each other recover both financially and emotionally from David's manipulation. We also started speaking at industry events about how to recognize and avoid predatory business relationships. But the most important thing I learned from this experience wasn't about business or money or even revenge. I learned that trust is the most precious thing we can give someone, and that anyone who violates that trust doesn't deserve a second chance to do it again. Looking back on those 2 years with David, I sometimes wonder how I could have been so blind to what was happening. How could I have missed so many red flags? How could I have been so naive? But I've come to realize that David was a professional manipulator. He was skilled at identifying successful, hardworking people who had something he wanted, and he was even more skilled at making them believe he was their partner instead of their predator. The signs were there, but they were carefully disguised as love and support. When someone encourages your dreams while secretly stealing them, when someone claims to help your business while actually taking it over, when someone says they love your independence while systematically destroying it, these are forms of manipulation that can fool anyone. The most important lesson I learned is this: real love and real support don't require you to give up control of your life. A true partner wants to see you succeed on your own terms, not under their control. Someone who genuinely cares about you will be transparent about business dealings, honest about finances, and proud of your achievements rather than threatened by them. If someone in your life is gradually taking over important decisions, keeping you in the dark about money, or making you feel dependent on them for success, those are warning signs, not signs of love. David thought he could manipulate me forever because I trusted him completely. He thought my love made me weak and gullible. But what he didn't understand is that the same trust and dedication that made me vulnerable to his manipulation also made me incredibly dangerous when that trust was broken. Never underestimate someone whose trust you violated, and never forget that the truth, no matter how carefully you try to hide it, always finds a way to come out. Some people think revenge is about anger or hatred, but sometimes revenge is simply about justice. Sometimes it's about making sure that someone who hurt you can never hurt anyone else the same way. David learned that lesson the hard way. And I learned that sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even. It's becoming so successful that your betrayer can only watch from the sidelines as you thrive without them. The truth will always set you free. But first, it might just destroy the person who tried to keep it hidden. Trust is earned through consistency, not manipulation. Real love builds you up. It doesn't tear you down for profit. And when someone shows you who they really are, believe them and act accordingly.